we're also seeing the first glimpse of where the 2020 race stands after last week's Democratic debate in Houston. And it seems like the frontrunners have solidified their spot at the top. A new poll from NBC News and the Wall Street Journal shows Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren both up since July, while Bernie Sanders holding steady in third. But maybe even more important, the poll paints the picture of an electorate that's actually pretty undecided and hungry for change. Less than 5 months before the first votes are cast, just 9% of voters say they have made up their minds. And 56% say they'd prefer a candidate who will propose large-scale policies that might be more expensive and harder to pass, but they will lead to greater change. NBC News national political correspondent and one of my all-time favorites, Steve Kornacki, is here to dig deeper into the numbers. What sticks out to you, Steve?
Couple things, Stephanie. You mentioned it. It is the fact that Elizabeth Warren, we've been talking for a long time here about, is it Warren? Is it Sanders in second place? Biden clearly in first? Well, here in our poll, you see Elizabeth Warren clearly in second place. And notably, do the math here, Elizabeth Warren closer to first place in this poll, closer to Biden than she is to Sanders. So we have Warren attaining some separation from Sanders. Let's see if that keeps up in other polls that come out. Also, why is Warren surging right now? Two things. There is, if you did sort of a Venn diagram of Warren and Sanders supporters, there is some overlap. There has been some overlap. To the extent that overlap exists, Warren now seems to be getting the better of it from Sanders. And also there's this, Kamala Harris. Remember, earlier this summer, there were polls that had her moving up close to 20% after that first debate, all the way down to just 5% in our new poll. And Warren seems to be the main beneficiary of Kamala Harris's slide. So that's why she's at 25% there. This, I think, an important divide to keep an eye on. We talk about this a lot. White voters here, look at this. Elizabeth Warren now leading 28-27 over Biden among white voters. When you look at black voters, different story. Again, Biden continues to be far ahead here. Warren now actually moving into double digits. We haven't seen her before getting double digits among black voters. But why this divide is so crucial, think about this. The first two states that vote, Iowa and New Hampshire, overwhelmingly white states. If Warren were to win those two states, it does raise the question of Biden's black support, which would start to come into play when you get down to South Carolina. Would that support hold if Joe Biden can't hold off Elizabeth Warren in Iowa and New Hampshire? That's a formula we've seen before. That's how John Kerry got the nomination in 2004. You win Iowa, you win New Hampshire, and then you build support among African Americans and other constituencies after that. That's happened before. Raises the question, Stephanie, if Elizabeth Warren might be setting herself up for something like that. And then the age divide. We've been talking about this one all campaign. It can be enormous. Bernie Sanders leading among voters under 35. Joe Biden trailing Andrew Yang among voters under 35. You flip it around to over 65. Biden far out in front. You don't even see Bernie Sanders' name here. He's at 3% there.
All right, Steve, thank you so much. Joining the conversation, Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, professor at the University of Texas, Noah Rothman, associate editor at Commentary Magazine, and Joel House of Pain, a Democratic strategist who worked on Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Victoria, ladies first. Biden and Warren both on the rise. But one thing that sticks out from this poll is the enthusiasm and the momentum that Elizabeth Warren has. What's your take?
She's in a very good position right now, Stephanie. So even though Biden is on top in the polls, we see that South Carolina, as Steve mentioned, might be an Achilles heel. He's doing really well now. But if Iowa and New Hampshire goes, he might lose that. I went back to 2007, pulled out my polls, and I saw that at about this time in 2007, Hillary Clinton led Barack Obama in South Carolina and with black voters in general by about 20 percentage points. By January, that evaporated. So that is an Achilles heel for Biden. And we also see the fact that Biden and Warren are neck and neck with delegates. And delegates are what actually matters here in the contest. And finally, I'm going to give you my bumper sticker count. A dispatch from Austin, Texas. I have been seeing more and more bumper stickers for Warren than I have for any other candidate. So I think she is in a very good position here.
All right, Joel, Elizabeth Warren spoke to our colleague Rachel Maddow last night. And one of the things they talked about was the selfie photos. The night before, when she held a rally in Washington Square Park, she stayed for 4 hours to take selfies with supporters. Let's take a listen.
And, yeah, I was there 4 hours, but I'll tell you what, so was the last guy in line. And he's in. He's all the way in this fight.
What does that tell you about how she's running her campaign? Because those 4 hours of selfies, she didn't need to be at fundraisers. Though that's the greatest free advertising you could think of, because every person there taking a picture, is posting it on social. It
also kind of belies the central organizing principle of the Warren bid, which is enthusiasm, right? And it's expanding the base. And that's what she's doing. She's got people who are waiting happily in line for 4 hours. And by the way, it's a contrast to some of the others in the field. Do you think that Joe Biden could do 4 hours of selfies after maybe
we don't know. I mean, that's sort of an assumption. The old guy can't do it for 4 hours. We don't know.
But I guess the point is, it's unsaid that she's got the endurance, that she's got the ability to do that. Also, I would say this. The central question I'm asking myself now is, can you sell a progressive to moderates, or can you sell a moderate to progressives? And I think Elizabeth Warren is demonstrating herself as somebody who is saying, I'm the progressive you can sell to moderates. I think she's starting to show that she can grow her ability to be the type of candidate that can pull together a winning coalition.
Noah, do you believe that she's the progressive that you could sell to moderates, or that more progressives are popping up, especially the youth vote that wasn't voting before? Because I'm not sure if you're seeing centrists say, yeah, I can get on this train.
Well, Democrats have to be a little concerned about Elizabeth Warren's central organizing principle, which I think was stated amiably here, admirably, which is essentially that Joe Biden wants to rebuild the Barack Obama coalition, which is tested. Elizabeth Warren can create a new coalition from low propensity voters. Young people are low propensity voters.
What does that mean?
They don't always show up.
What?
They don't always show up. They say they're going to show up, and not always do they. They did in 2018. They might in 2020. Donald Trump is the organizing principle there. That might work. I feel in the press a sense that there is inevitable momentum for Elizabeth Warren, that the trajectory for her is preordained.
Why?
And
because everyone's focusing on her?
I feel that there's a lot of focus on her. When we have a poll out of Iowa today that shows Joe Biden up. Every poll in New Hampshire in September shows Joe Biden up. He is prohibitive in South Carolina. He's doing very well in Nevada. And after that is Super Tuesday, which is California, Texas, Massachusetts, all these places with really big media markets. So you can do a lot of selfies, but you have to play in Houston. You have to play in Los Angeles, San Francisco. Big media markets that you need a lot of money for. So if you're not doing big fundraisers, you might not be competitive.
Stephanie, really quickly, my argument is the problem the Democrats had in 2016 is they could not get the base excited enough to show up. People in places like Milwaukee, in Detroit, in Philadelphia. If you have a candidate that is expanding that progressive base, you can change the math to the point where you actually aren't going to be reliant upon anxious Trump voters to come over. So I think that she is approaching this from a different standpoint, and I think it's showing that it could be successful for her.
Victoria, Noah makes me think money and Kamala Harris. She's down 8 points. She's now behind Pete Buttigieg. And our reporters who are covering her have said she hasn't held a public event since September 7th. But what she has done has been raising money, quietly out there, raising. Is that the right strategy, given that when you want to make it on the big stage, you need a whole lot of money to do it?
You do need a whole lot of money, but you also need the personal touch. You need the pressing of the flesh, the getting out there, doing the selfies. In an ideal world, you want both. You want a ton of money, and you want that personal contact. Something which, by the way, Beto did very well when he ran for Senate here in Texas. So I think what Kamala, if I had to crystal ball here, is doing is setting herself up for the long game, so she can survive past Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, so she can continue on through Super Tuesday and hopefully get on the short list for VP, short list for some major cabinet position if the Ds win. But one thing I do want to point out really quickly in terms of the Warren discussion we've been having is she going to be able to knock Bernie off? Because if Bernie holds on like he did during 2016, he would not let go. He would not leave the race. If Bernie stays in the race, he is going to keep that solid block of supporters that he has consistently had. And that's going to keep Warren from ultimately getting the nomination and it going to Biden. So for me, one of the big question marks is what's going to happen to Bernie. Does he stay in, or does he cede the way to Warren?
Okay, well, put logic aside. Knowing Bernie, knowing who he is, knowing his campaign and what he has had in the past, and knowing the numbers, if they were to consolidate the progressive base under one of the two, and in this case it seems more Elizabeth Warren, what would that do to Joe Biden? Do you see, Noah, Bernie Sanders looking at these numbers and saying, you know what? Maybe it's time for me to step out?
Well, I think he would look at those numbers and probably say it's time for me to be a little bit more aggressive towards Elizabeth Warren. I mean, if we're beginning to understand, there's another conceit here that these two progressives are competing for very distinct pools of voters. There's some overlap, but not a lot. That doesn't make any sense to me. Of course they're fighting for the same voters. There can be one progressive alternative to Joe Biden. It will be Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders' record suggests he's a fighter, and he wants to be in this for the long haul, and he thinks he can do it. And when these two candidates, one of them conceives of the fact that there can be only one, that this is Highlander, then they will have to go after each other. And frankly, neither of them have shown the interest in doing so. But if Bernie Sanders is the first to have that epiphany, then I can see him absolutely going after Elizabeth Warren's record on corporate attorney work, her past as a registered Republican. All that stuff is really still untrodden territory for the Democrats.
Then is it still anyone's game? And clearly for Bernie Sanders, it's not a time to stand still. It's time to stand up or step out. And I want to look at history for a minute, because it amazes me from this poll, only 9% say they're decided. Because let's look back. I think Victoria mentioned it earlier, but in 2008, Hillary Clinton was leading by 18 points. Rudy Giuliani led by 4 points. Rick Perry in 2012 led by almost 8 points. Knowing all those numbers, where we were historically, does that mean all this that we're saying right now is nonsense because this thing, who knows where it goes?
I don't think it's nonsense, but I think it does suggest that this is still very much up in the air. And by the way, that is going to lend itself to less candidates deciding, I'm going to jump out now. That means that whether Bernie Sanders continues to crater, whether or not Buttigieg or Harris continue to stall out a bit, they're going to be less likely to say, I got to drop out because there's not a chance for me to win the nomination. There is still very much a path for, I'd say, at least a half a dozen of these Democrats to still win the nomination. I think it's very wide open, but I do think the trend lines point to Biden, Warren being kind of the battle for the soul of the party right at this moment.
And as Victoria noted, this is about delegates. The rules of the nominating contests in these states allow you to accrue delegates. There aren't very many winner-take-alls, so you can take your delegates to the convention and be a force at the convention.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.